What is the percentage chance that this Supreme Court action regarding the Haredi draft controversy brings down this government in the next 2 to 3 months?
That is a very good question that I will have a hard time answering. If you'd asked me a couple days ago, I would have said higher than I'd say now. Um, so the
Why
Haredim
is
have
that? Why
shown
is that? Why is the percentage change?
that a lot of them are willing to stay in the government regardless of what happens. The reason being that they no longer have anything to gain from from leaving. So what people thought, the reason what happened is the Supreme Court decision was such a shock isn't because they didn't side with the government. No one really expected them to, but it's rather because it was so final. They said, you're going to stop funding, you're going to stop now. What people expected was for them to say, stop funding unless, until, blah, blah, blah. Um, because of that, if there's elections now, the status quo freezes. Now, if the status quo had been frozen on terms that were good for the Haredim, that might have meant, okay, let's go to elections. But now it would be frozen on terms that are bad for them. So now they think if we go to elections, we're going to not have funding for all the months of the elections. So better we stay in the government and try to force the government to pass a law that benefits us. So a very likely outcome of this is the Haredim get some kind of bill like that passed, or really try to get a bill like that passed, and that means that Gantz and Eisenkot leave the government. To some extent, Gantz and Eisenkot leaving the government is pretty much a fait accompli at this point. They may wait another month, they may not, until it's clear where the government is going with this law. But Netanyahu is going to have to choose between the Haredi parties and Gantz, and he's going to choose the Haredi parties. It's not even a question. They're much more loyal. He can work with them more easily. They have a long partnership. Gantz is an unreliable partner from his perspective because Gantz wants to be prime minister. Gantz can and will stab him in the back when it's right for him, and that's expected. The Haredim, it's less of a zero-sum game. They have differences of opinion, but they also both want the government to survive. So I think the bread is buttered in that direction. But so that won't lead to elections directly. But with Gantz and Eisenkot leaving and Gidon Saar saying he's not going in, Gidon Saar already left, by the way.
Because he didn't get
Um,
into the war cabinet. Yeah.
he didn't get into the war cabinet, and now he was asked if they offer you a war cabinet seat, will you go in? And he said no, because he realizes how unpopular the government is. I think he'll stand by it. Not principles, again, just political expediency. So what'll happen is Eisenkot and Gantz are going to be out of the government, and Saar won't go in, Lapid won't go in, no one will go in. So it'll be a narrow right-wing government at a time where that's untenable in terms of the public. So what you're going to see, in my opinion, is the protests coming back at a much higher velocity than they are right now, and the country again being shook to its core, like with the reforms, but more so because the opposition has gained supporters, and by moving to a more narrow government, they're going to exacerbate that. I would do the same if I was Netanyahu. He doesn't have, I mean, I would resign if I was Netanyahu. But if I had Netanyahu's psychology, I would do the same. That's the logical thing for him to do. But it also is very dangerous. All this leads to Netanyahu falling at some point. It's just a question of when. The time horizon doesn't look to me like it's going to be 2, 3 months. It looks to me like it'll be about a year.
Just for the audience, let's just briefly explain this Haredi thing. So they were what 3% of the population in the 70s or something like that, and now they're about 12%.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's exactly right. And they're projected to be in the 20% by 2050.
They have a lot of kids. So they have
Yeah.
a pretty amazing deal in Israel. They get paid to study the Torah all day, or a lot of them do. They don't work that much in the private. They don't contribute a lot to the public coffers, the welfare state. And then on top of it, I mean, I almost admire this, the chutzpah. And then they get all these public benefits and then they refuse to serve in the military or some. You am I wrong there?
No, everything you said is right. The only qualification is the vast majority. There are Haredi who serve, but we're talking about a few hundred. It's the numbers are very low. That's, by the way, one of the reasons that the decision was made by the courts is because for years the government was saying we're going to raise the number until it's an acceptable number, and they haven't. They haven't been able to, or they haven't even really tried. I don't know. Depends on who you ask.
And that
But it's remained a few hundred.
and that's I've heard that's partially because of the dating market. Because if you're, I've heard that if you're Haredi and you join the military, your value in the sort of dating market, you're seen as more secular, and that's sort of why I think they have to just draft them, rather than this pressure thing. So, what is the? Did it start today that the funding is cut, or
Yeah, yeah. So the funding has been cut, but we need to be very precise about this. Um, it's not that big a financial hit for the yeshivot. So what's been cut is not the funding to any yeshiva where these men are studying, but rather the amount that is allocated to individuals between the ages of 18 and 26. 26 being the age after which, if you haven't served in the army until then, you'll never serve. So that's been cut. That's about 300 million shekels, about 20% of their funding, a significant amount, but not anything that they can't overcome. No other arm of the government is allowed to make up the funding by law. It doesn't mean they won't, but at least they'll be trying to trace that, and maybe they won't. What I've seen the yeshivot are saying, and I believe them, is that they'll be able to privately raise those funds, and they're allowed to elsewhere. They said, it's not a big deal. We can raise the funds. So that's another reason I think the government's not going to fall, because I don't think this really hurts the yeshivot all that much. I don't think this forces anyone to go to the army or anything like that. It's symbolic and it's important, and most Israelis are very happy about it because one of the major sticking points is that the Israeli taxpayer funds this. So this will start to change that. But this doesn't force them to go to the army. There's going to be another hearing about that in May. And then they'll decide whether the Haredi men of this age have to go to the army or not, or at least whether they'll get draft notices. That hasn't been decided yet. By
and their
law, at this point they probably should, but the court is going to discuss that
and
before.
their
Yeah,
leader, I forget his name. He said, "We'll leave the country if you force us to go into the army." Do you buy that, or is that a bluff?
that was the main Sephardic rabbi of Israel. So that wasn't even, just some random political leader. He's a major institutional figure. No, I don't think anyone buys that. There might be some people who leave, but there really is no country in the world that is going to want to take hundreds of thousands of people without
You So
any
the U.S.
particular.
government isn't going to pay them to read the Torah all day? Is that really? Oh wow.
Yeah, so there's two problems here. One is they don't have any, no offense to religious Jews, but
No
that,
offense.
studying the Torah is not a marketable skill, and countries don't necessarily give visas to people like that. A country, just about every country in the world awards visas and awards citizenship to people that feel can contribute to the economy. And even if they were allowed in, they would have to work for a living. And in the end of the day, Israel is going to allow them to get funds in various ways. It just might they just might have some of them might have to go to the army. So I think in the end of the day, they're going to get a better deal in Israel than anywhere else. There's a few that have American citizenship, relatives in the U.S. can leave. I don't think that's the majority.
Uh,
I know what most Israelis are saying when they say leave is go ahead.
yeah, no,
That's
I have the translate, Google Translate. I read all the comments. Like, can I buy you the ticket, please? I'll take you
that is
there.
that is about 90% of the people who are not Orthodox are saying that. Yes.